I'm Eric Siegel, CEO and co-founder of Gooder AI. This is the sixth of several short how-to hands-on videos that'll get you started using Gooder AI to evaluate your ML models and plan ML deployment to achieve maximal business value. All the supporting docs and links that you need to follow along and try it out yourself are at gooder.ai/hands-on. In this video, I'll cover the decision threshold, which drives model deployment and which you establish within Gooder, and how the decision threshold relates to and differs from the decision boundary. So this video concludes the core Getting Started series, although further future how-to videos will be added. So here's the setup for targeting marketing we covered in the very first video. As we have briefly seen before, if you scroll to the bottom in the standard config setup that we started with for this one, we have the decision threshold as a chart, right? So left to right, as always, with all the charts, is the setting of the decision boundary, how many individual cases treated, contacted for marketing in the case of this project. And then the Y coordinate is the actual value of the decision threshold, model score threshold to deploy for that basis. So I'm going to explain that, dig into it, give a few examples, but actually more actionably and simply. And the main way you would end up actually using decision threshold is not with looking at a chart like this, which is sort of it's sort of a QAing or maybe academic exercise, but actually just by adding it as another row to the table, especially when you're sort of established, you're done, you're ready to deploy, you've determined the decision boundary and you're ready to deploy. So let's add that as a new row in that table. We're going to go to widget selector in config, and remember that this column is whether the individual metric or widget or what have you shows as a chart, and this is whether it shows as a row in the table. So we go to the bottom, that's where decision threshold happens to be. Turn it on and go back to the home screen, and now you see we have a new row to the table, which is the decision threshold, the value of model scores, model output predictive scores, to which you compare in order to enact whatever the current decision boundary is set. So as I move the decision boundary from left to right, from treating, or in this case contacting with marketing, very few or 0%, up to 100%, the decision threshold that corresponds to that changes. So for example, if I want to treat the top 20%, that would mean we'd compare it to, for the best of these three models, model 1, we'd compare it to a decision threshold value of 0.44. So every individual, after being scored with the model's output, the probability predictive score is 0.44 or greater, then treat the individual. By doing that, I'll be treating the top 20%. Right? The purpose of a model is to predict the outcome or behavior in order to decide whether you're going to perform some kind of treatment, right? So the model prioritizes, it orders, it triages, and then we put it on these charts from left to right, highest, that is most likely, whatever you're predicting with the model, down to least likely. So those with the highest score, in this case, the highest chances of buying if contacted, are more towards the left. So if I set the decision boundary to 20% and treat the top 20%, that means every individual sort of to the left of the decision boundary, who would all correspond to having a decision threshold of 0.42 or more, right? Or if I want to do the top 10%, in this case of this particular model, would be 8.2. So the two decision threshold and decision boundary correspond. They're generally inversely related, and it's nonlinear, as you can see. These lines are squiggly, right? You might see the shape of like an S curve if you're using log linear or what have you, but that's kind of academic. Typically, you don't have to worry about the decision threshold when you're using Gooder. You can leave the row of the table off during most of the time that you're interacting with it, trying different potential values for these business factors that are subject to change and uncertainty, getting a sense of how big a difference they make, navigating where you might want to position that decision boundary in deployment, both with regard to sort of the main bottom line monetary metric like profit we have here, which would be optimized at almost 30%, or you finding the trade-off between that and competing KPIs, such as the number contact corresponding to of course, the marketing budget in the case of this use case for targeting marketing. You might want to add another row to the table with a metric with the literal dollar amount for targeting marketing with config. But whatever it is, you've navigated, and when you're navigating, you're using the product. The intuition is decision boundary. It's the proportion that you want to treat. Do you treat the top 10%? Do you audit for fraud the top 5% of transactions, the top 2%? That's the decision boundary. And that's the intuition. And then when you're sort of done, you're ready to go to deployment, you would turn on this table. In fact, right now, this is not set to very precise. It's only 2 digits after the decimal point. Let's just quickly see how to do that. Go to widget settings, widgets, which is basically synonymous to metric or chart or row of the table. And you're going to find the decision threshold 1. And you're going to say, hey, look, I don't want just 2 digits after the decimal place. I want 4. So make that change to config, update current chart, and then go back, and now you see you've got more precise decision thresholds here. In any case, use the product, think intuitively in terms of decision boundary, and then you find the decision threshold value that corresponds to it. So as a matter of, the one of the main purposes of Gooder that's a change from the way things are usually done is that it presents visually and intuitively that range of potential deployment uses of a model. A model doesn't dictate how you use it. It doesn't set the decision threshold automatically. That is a deliberation that's meant to be done intentionally with human eyes according to all the different trade-offs and metrics that we've put into this interface. A lot of tools out there and a lot of practice to just sort of presume or default to a decision threshold of 0.5. Clearly, that's not necessarily optimal. If you're just going straight for bottom line profit, you can see what the decision threshold is here, depending on the particular model that you use. So machine learning will create a model that makes predictive scores or probabilities, but doesn't tell you how to use it. Doesn't set that number crunching, doesn't dictate threshold. That's a business decision, and that's one of the main purposes of this tool. Now, think of it in terms of the boundary. That's the intuition, and then to enact that in deployment, you're going to go use this number as the threshold in deployment. So let's just, before we wrap up, let's just quickly take a look at the other 2 data sets that we've covered in these videos. So fraud detection, let's turn on the decision boundary here. Once again, it's towards the bottom, turn it on into the table, go back, and now we've added a new row, decision threshold, right? Now, remember that in an earlier video, we calculated expected value as the model score times the size of the transaction. So under expected value here, the decision threshold is actually a monetary amount. In this case, $30.40, right? As opposed to the other ones, which are probabilities. So model scores are probabilities, but if you created a new thing that's sort of acting as a model, that you're going to be driving decisions based on expected value, which is the model score times the amount of the transaction, then you'd actually be thresholding in deployment over a monetary amount. So let's take a look at what that looks like in the chart. Well, you don't see anything. Why do I not see anything? Well, let's turn off expected value for a moment. Okay, now we have 3 models. They differ in the way that decision boundary and threshold relate. Fine. The problem is if I turn on expected value, it's a different unit, right? So right now, the y-axis, everything's a probability. They're model scores, 0 to 1. But the expected value is a totally different unit. It's a monetary amount, $30, $40, up to $3,000. So it's just going to make it so that the other 3, you just can't see them at all. So if you do need to think about project specifics, especially if you've calculated expected value, you're using something other than a raw model score to drive decisions. Okay, and then lastly, we've got the home equity line of credit. So we could turn on that row, but I'll just quickly jump to here and point out, hey, look, we've got sort of the opposite. Then instead of going from top right down to top left down to bottom right, it's going bottom left up to top right with these 3 different models. Why is that? Well, reminder, you can go back and see the video. The way we did this is in configuration, when we set it up, we have all of these models sorting ascending instead of descending. that is from lowest to highest rather than highest to lowest, because the models are predicting who's going to default on their credit. But for driving the decision of who should be approved for a loan, we want to sort in the reverse direction, right? So everything to the left of the decision boundary are those who are more likely to not default. That is to say, less likely to default. So we reversed the ordering, and then that just ends up being reflected when you look at this. So that's it. Bunch of technical clarifications, good food for thought. But again, just focus on decision boundaries. That's the most intuitive thing. And then when it comes to saying, hey, look, I've got this decision boundary setting, the top 25%, whatever it is. Now it's almost just a technical step. You now need to know what decision boundary what decision threshold to choose in order to enact that decision boundary. Thanks again for watching, and let us know any questions, technical requests through the support form on gooder.ai/hands-on.